Join me in today's episode of Lifting All Ships, where I talk to the amazing Michael Shikashio about his journey into dog training, from being a trainer that used aversive tools and compulsion to one that now embraces reinforcement-based dog training. Also, the recent social media thunderstorm that he was subjected to and the life lessons he learned from that experience. Join me in today's episode of Lifting All Ships. So I'm super excited to have this conversation with my friend and colleague from the other side of the pond about his work and his role. I'll let him formally introduce himself and his official title and what he does. But we've met on several platforms in several conferences that we've spoken on at the same time. And the one that really, I suppose, was I'd never had a conversation like this was the one that we had for Clicker Expo, where we talked about ethnic minorities in the industry, and obviously we are few and far between, but it was just such a powerful conversation, and it really humanized the conversation, which wasn't one that I had before. And as a result, I thought that's such an important thing to see in our industry, that we can be a little bit tribal, and we can go into our corners and put our fists up with our spears, and we need to be thinking, actually, we're all human beings. We're doing the best we can, in the situations that we're with, the information that we have, and so forth. So I thought, you know what, I will reach out to Mike and see if we can have a conversation about things. So how are you keeping? And obviously, I won't butcher your name, Mike, so I'm not going to even attempt to say it. And your what you exactly do for people that are watching.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Kamal. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you providing this platform so we can chat about these things.
Absolutely.
Uh, I'm Mike Shikashio, and the easiest way to remember that I always tell people is like it sounds like pistachio. So, so Mike
Oh, that's a good
Shikashio.
one. Okay,
Yeah,
good. Got it.
people
Got
always
it.
remember it that way. And yeah, I focus on aggression. I'm the CEO and founder of AggressiveDog.com, and that's kind of been my niche, some specialty for the last decade or so, and been training for about 20 years. But yeah, I love teaching and helping trainers learn about working with aggression in dogs.
Excellent, excellent. So you're based, obviously, from the accent, in the States, in Connecticut, and just tell us a little bit about how you as a person that probably doesn't fit the stereotype of what most people perceive as a dog trainer. Certainly, I don't. How did you get into this world?
Oh, it's an interesting kind of segue from my previous career. I was working in a casino. That has nothing to
Oh,
do
as
with,
you do.
uh,
Yeah, yeah. Well, you
absolutely
still
nothing
play
to do
Russian
with what I
roulette
do
with your
now.
with dogs now. That's the only
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah, it's I was the head butler, so I was taking care of all these high rollers and
Wow.
celebrities coming in. And so it was really helpful for learning how to deal with people and talk to people and having conversations with all kinds of different characters and personalities. But at the time, I was fostering dogs, so doing a lot of rescue and foster work, which slowly transitioned into my career now. And it was not what I expected to do. And certainly, as you were mentioning, not something you would typically say I see as a male Asian. We've don't see many in our profession, although I'm seeing more and more, thankfully,
Yeah.
in the recent years. So yeah, it just something I was interested in terms of dog behavior, training, and then opening a dog business of some sort. But then it really started to focus on the aggression stuff because I found that the most rewarding because I felt I could help the most dogs and their people because one of the most common reasons to be a dog to be given up on or surrendered or returned to a shelter. So what better way to help them stay out of rescue and shelter situations than to work on the behavior side of things?
Oh, that's awesome. So, were you essentially a pet dog owner that went to a training class, or did it happen organically for you?
Yeah, it's kind of like the typical story, as many trainers have, they end up getting their first aggressive dog, or for me, it was a whole bunch of aggressive dogs or dogs with aggression issues. And and I found that again, I had to learn, I don't like to do things without some information behind or something to back up, like say, rather than say, oh, I saw it on a TV show, so now I had to train dogs. So
Yeah.
that kind of created a deep dive for me where I wanted to learn a lot more about behavior and training. So, part my own dogs, part my foster dogs, part just wanting to know what I'm doing and actually make sure I'm helping these dogs rather than causing harm.
Mhm.
And it's so yeah, a little bit of organic, but somewhat structured along the way. You know, as you go along, like most trainers, you start taking courses and attending conferences and networking and those kind of things. So it's been quite a journey over the
Yeah,
last
it sounds
20
like.
years.
I mean, you're a fantastic speaker, and your work is, absolutely fantastic. It's great to hear you talk at things, and anybody that has a chance to check out Mike's conferences and any of the platforms that he speaks on is definitely worth listening to. But I mean, obviously, 20 years ago, training was a slightly different world. How
Mhm.
were you a trainer that use different techniques to what you do now? Have you evolved?
Yes, I started about as I would say compulsion based as you could start. So my first sort of mentor was somebody that ex-military, military dog trainer. So lots of using choke chains, prong collars, shock collars were sort of in the tools that people would use at the time, but they weren't as modern as they are now. So we didn't actually use that much when I first started out. But the first week, I didn't even have hands on a dog. It was just to attach the choke chain to a fence and practice correcting. So you get the
Wow.
proper amount of correction. Which is kind of good in a way because you're not
Yeah.
practicing on dogs, but it's not good because you're just learning to perfect a technique that hurts dogs. But it's so I started very compulsion based. No food, no treats, no even praise was very limited. And so very different style of training, learning from books like Monks of New Skeet. Even when Caesar came around, I started kind of like watching that show and just so you can imagine just what kind of trainer I started out as. And then that started to transition into more learning. And I started actually back in that time. This is going to date me a little bit, but they had the Yahoo groups. So Yahoo had these sort of chat rooms, sort of like Facebook groups now. And that at that time was just all email listservs. And I started to join discussion groups to learn more. And that's when I got skewered because I didn't realize, so I didn't even know about positive reinforcement training at the time. So I'm going in there like, oh yeah, yeah, you get this dominant dog, and good thing to do is just alpha roll them. And I read that in the Monks of New Skeet, and I was really that was my initial foray into Yahoo groups. And of course, I joined some positive training groups. There was like clicker training groups, and I started talking like that. And of course, you can imagine the response I got. Some negative comments, of course, but also some positive comments, and some folks that were really open to trying to teach me. Hey, there's this guy, Mike. He's young. He's new to this training world. Let me see if I can help him out and learn some of these things. So one of my first mentors was Barbara Brill, the late Barbara Brill. She ran this group. It was called AGBE, which was short for aggressive behaviors. And I started to learn from her, and she made some book suggestions, Culture Clash, Don't Shoot the Dog, the typical recommendations we get. And I started to dive into that. And that started my crossover journey. And it really got me thinking more about using what I do today now is reinforcement based training. But it was a slow shift, as many of us do in our crossover journey. So I started to use things like more treats and started to get into clicker training, and it gradually shifted away from those previous tools. And I'd studied how to use e-collars and did some workshops on e-collar training, even back then. And then that again also transitioned. I started to learn, okay, I can use less of these tools because I'm learning how to use reinforcement more. But again, I owe that all to the mentors that really took me under their wings. That, hey, Mike, there's this other way. I understand what you're doing now, but there's this other way, and let's learn more about it. And so it kind of carried over into that. And so I'm happy to be able to do the same now. The same process is just open up doors for folks that might be using tools that we know that can be detrimental in aggression cases, especially, and being able to open that road for learning for them. And so it's kind of come full circle. So for the late Barbara out there, thank you for what you've done because you've created these ripples. And I think that's important, creating these open opportunities and these ripples in our industry, right?
Definitely, definitely. But you know what? I always look back to people of that and that time period who dared to really go against the current, and how brave they must have been. Because there's a couple of certainly big names. I would say Patty Russo in the sports world in America. Obviously, your mentors. There's several other people, Karen Pryor, people like that, Ian Dunbar, who were
Mhm.
really. If you look back now and you think, wow, that really took some guts to go very much against the traditional thinking.
Mhm.
And Sometimes you may even look at them and go, oh, actually, the methodology and the techniques have refined even further. But like you say, what a ripple effect that those people are not, I'm sure, like, I'm very grateful to the people that had the courage to step against the norm, really. So in your was there a particular dog or a case or an instance that made you go, I think I need to do this differently?
Yes, there's this dog Barney. It's and you can guess what kind of breed, Beagle, that was my definitely my crossover dog in a sense that and as part of my fostering, I did a lot of lab rescue, Dobermans. So think big dogs that and especially field bred labs. I would use a lot of prong collars and just getting them trained for adoption. So not pulling on leash, not jumping up on people. And most of the time, I'm going in, correcting them with a prong collar back then. And, you would get the typical response, it would work in using air quotes here. It would work for me. But it was my first beagle. And of course, what do beagles do? They're going to go around and they're going to be pulling on leash because they want to smell things. And I said, "Oh, you can't be doing this because we need you to walk nicely on leash next to me." And of course, that was my
Thinking,
mindset at the time. And so I went out there, put a prong collar on him, and the first correction I gave him, he let out the most blood-curdling beagle scream, if you can imagine how much beagles
oh, yeah,
vocalize.
yeah, yeah.
But it was, and my neighbor was out there looking at me like, "What are you doing?" And it really was this light bulb moment of like, this is not right what I'm doing. It may seem to work, but obviously Barney's telling me this is not appropriate at all. This hurts. And it started really my journey into, okay, what else can I do, especially for a dog that is, designed by humans to sniff and want to pull towards things and enjoy life by sniffing and using their nose. So started to learn about positive reinforcement training using treats and that's really thanks to Barney started my exploration into other techniques as well. So definitely my crossover dog.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. So at that time, you were working primarily in shelters, helping rescues, I suppose, assess, rehab, and rehome dogs. Is that what
Yeah,
your
and mostly, fostering in the home. Most of my hands-on experience did come from fostering dogs. I had over 100 foster dogs in and out of my home over the course of a few years, all kinds of different types. And then I even started doing home board and train and things like that. So a lot of in-home experience, which is an interesting side of things because I always tell trainers if you want to learn more, foster dogs because there's no better way to learn if you have a dog with behavior issues
all the
living
time?
with you, your
Yeah,
dogs, your cats, your kids,
yeah,
and it's yeah. So
yeah. And so obviously that dog sparked something within you to go, okay, I need to think differently about the what I was doing at the time or what you were doing at the time. So then obviously you had mentors that were able to support you and help you. What did you notice? I suppose when you dabbled into reinforcement based dog training, I don't know about your experience, but mine was, to be honest, I did it badly at first, like you do with all dog training. And it's ironic, looking back when I was a trainer that when I was learning and we learned using aversives and compulsion, certainly check chains. And I shudder now. I made numerous errors when I first clicker trained, and
mhm.
I shudder the fact that I definitely made numerous errors when I used aversive tools. Um, would you say that the journey into positive reinforcement, whilst it might have had its bumps in the road, when did you start to sort of have that realization? Actually, I think this is gonna work, and it is gonna be powerful, and it's gonna be more effective. When did you have that realization?
That's a great question. I think probably once I started attending conferences and putting the puzzle pieces together, because as dog trainers, especially back then, everything was kind of, all over the place. There
It
was
was
no one
pre-internet.
like
Yeah.
university, right? Yeah, there was no like one place to go. You were kind of cherry picking things from
Yeah.
maybe a webinar or a
Yeah.
Yahoo group
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
and you're reading a book. So you're kind of piecemealing this
Yeah.
information. It can get it's difficult to put that all together into a cohesive package. So I think it was when I started attending conferences like the Clicker Expo, IWABC conference, APDT conference here in the States, and seeing how trainers that were using mostly positive reinforcement or positive reinforcement based really approach their cases in the structure of it. Good training plans, really looking at the ABCs. of behavior, learning about applied behavior analysis, of course. And I think that really helped me kind of put my mind around it all. I'm like, wait a second. Oh, okay. Now I kind of get it. Now I know that, okay, how to put these pieces together to create a program using a reinforcement-based strategy versus a punishment-based strategy. I think it required that, just seeing other professionals and again, getting out there. So it wasn't again any kind of light bulb sort of shift. It was gradual, again, putting those pieces together, which is the beauty of today, is that we have so much more information out there and so many ways of getting it, that it makes me happy too to see all of that, that available.
Yeah, on that note though, because I suppose the counter argument or the discussion, let's say the discussion is, in a lot of instances, aversive tools and punishment, I'm going to say, works or appears to work. Let's be candid enough to say, in certain instances, using a firm collar correction is going to stop the behavior. There's nobody, I think, could argue that. If a trainer with really good skills, excellent timing, etc., collar corrects the dog at the right time, it will stop the dog doing X. So what is I suppose, playing devil's advocate, if it works, why will you as a trainer, and certainly obviously appreciate the choir, but let's just play devil's advocate for a minute, why take that option off the table?
I think that's such a great question, because it works. Let's face it, punishment works. It's part of learning, right? And of course, it's going to be something we fall back to. If it's worked for us in the past, why not keep doing it? If we're not recognizing any problems with it, or we're not seeing it for ourselves, then why would we need to change? Like, if it's not broken, don't fix it kind of mentality. What really started to get my mind to shift around is thinking about how that dog is experiencing things from the inside, from their emotional level, from looking at that dog as a sentient being versus, something I can just fix like a dishwasher. And it's not that I was like thinking these dogs were just cold slates and like robots back then, but I think it takes time to think about that and how much it could really impact the animal that we have, that we're working with, because we don't often see those emotions if we don't know what we're looking for, or if we're interpreting a different way because of the cultural fog that we've been fed about, particular body language or dominance from the dogs trying to be alpha. And when you are fed those particular narratives, of course, you're going to believe in them, because that's where your mindset is. That's your bias at the moment. So taking a deep dive into the emotions and the emotional experiences of animals is what helped me shift. And then especially when I got into aggression work, the vast majority of those cases are because of some underlying issue, emotions, pain, all of the things that punishment can, of course, exacerbate. And so for me, it made perfect sense. Of course, we want to not include anything that's going to exacerbate the current fuel for our behavior problem. And so I think that's it's a little bit of a learning curve, because it's also part of our how we are brought up, maybe our cultural experiences around animals. My parents, maybe yours as well. The dog was,
Oh,
especially my dad, grew up on a farm in Idaho. I mean, animals are utilities, or not necessarily pets, or looked at as, being these emotionally rich beings that we're sharing space with. They are looked at as, okay, the cows, the tools, the dogs hurting, whatever. They don't know dogs guarding. They don't think of dogs experiencing what they're experiencing at an emotional level. So part of, for me, it was the cultural thing. It was, I was like early on, yeah, I cared about animals, of course, but didn't really look deep into that, into the soul, into their eyes, and so to speak. So I think that's part of where, when somebody says, "Oh, it's working, the tool's working," yes, it's working, but at what cost and at what expense to the animal? And as you know, it takes time. It takes time to recognize that for some people. Some
yeah,
people are born with it, right? But
absolutely. And I
some
think
are not.
the other thing that I feel about it, and sort of, is that if we're really truthful, dogs, the dogs that have challenges, dogs that have behavioral problems, if you actually track back in the dog's life, the chances are that somewhere along that path, a human being has done something, not in terms of physically, but has had an influence of why that dog has now got that particular problem. So let's just say, let's look at this holistically. So as a greater conversation, i.e., you have a dog like a terrier. We purposely selected dogs to have the desire to want to hunt, to react, to want to basically grab something, shake it, essentially kill it. And then we've shifted the goalpost because we've changed our relationship with the dogs. And we've gone, oh, actually, really what I want you to do is sit on the sofa for 8 to 12 hours when I'm at work and power nap. And then I'm going to take you out the front door and there's going to be something that moves fast and I want you to ignore it. I'm really sorry. I know that you're going to have to ignore your genetics and what you're predisposed to with no training or information. So now what I'm going to do, because I don't like that behavior, I'm going to use something that's going to afflict a level of discomfort or etc. And I think, well, hang on a second. As humans, we caused our own problem. It's like we've created what we've, that's part of it. That's one example. Another example could be, a breeder has mismatched the puppy for whatever reason. You see this quite, I think, a lot. I don't know what it's like in the States, but we're getting a lot of dogs that are bred, really working bred dogs, Malinois, high drive shepherds, Dutch herders, that really are being home to people that really shouldn't have that type of dog for their lifestyle, and the inevitable happens, and then you have a behavioral challenge to deal with, and again, there's a human influence of that situation involving. And I then think, so now you have as a professional, you have to go in there and pick up the pieces from somebody else's, not the dog, because the dog didn't decide where it's home. The dog didn't decide to be born, so to speak. So that, for me, there's that part of it to it as well, of the conversation of why those choices for me aren't options, because I think, well, we as human beings should really take responsibility for what we've basically caused and created in a lot of instances, but yeah, I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of interesting points because yes, we as humans, humankind, have created all kinds of problems for our own dogs because of, we're not recognizing how culture has changed, how society has changed from their, and then we're taking these dogs and with the sort of evolution of travel and being able to get to places so much easier now. And it's just, now think about it, 100 years ago, we wouldn't be like importing dogs from Korea or to rescue in Canada and the United States. That would have never existed. And now we're doing that in a mass scale. And we're taking these dogs and we're shifting them to different cultures. It's almost like we did the same thing to people. Let's just pluck people out from their homes in different countries and send them everywhere else. And so, so for me, I think we need to really shift how we if a dream world for me or a dream wish would be like thinking about how we be ambassadors for humankind to the dogs we're working with and saying, hey, listen, I'm sorry for all the things that humans have done, whether it's somebody that's punished you in the past or hoarded you in the past or did awful things in the name of rescue or all of these different things that humankind has done to dogs. And what can we do for these dogs now based on all of these cultural influences that have impacted their welfare and their quality of life? What can we do to shift that narrative forward? And so again, going on a really big scale here, is it how we live with the dogs in our society, the expectations we place? Is it like you were talking about, breed specific traits or characteristics that we need to maybe look at? We have to understand those more so they do go to the right places while they're there, or we're selecting for more pet friendly dogs, so in looking at our breeding practices and where we're getting dogs from. So rather than, trying to save dogs, yes, it's important to save dogs, of course, in other places where they're, let's say the meat trade. Um, is it really, are we really fixing the problem? Are we just providing more sources for that continued production of dogs from really terrible conditions? So we have to kind of really think deeply about where we're getting dogs from, what the purposes we're selecting for, what expectations we have in our life, and culture, and the location they're going to be in. I think, as you travel a lot too. You're seeing dogs in so many different environments and cultures, and they're so good at adapting. But we put a tremendous amount of pressure of that on them, and we have to think about that.
And
what are
I
we
don't know about
expecting?
you. Sorry, interrupting you. I said, no, I
Yeah.
don't know about you, but you definitely see there's definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, a difference in the dog's behavior depending on the culture and the country that you're in. Without a shadow of a doubt, I would say America, England have a similar relationship with our dogs, whereas I'd say Europe slightly different, Australia again slightly different, New Zealand slightly different, and it's based on, you know, the culture of the people and the country itself. And I think there's definitely a correlation between, and again, it would need somebody, you know, far more qualified than me to do the study into it to see the correlation between culture and dog behavior and the relationships we have. So here's a loaded question, again, playing devil's advocate. Do you believe there is ever a justifiable instance where an aversive tool or a punisher is a viable option? Because that's the one that that's the one that always gets thrown into the melee of debates, is the hypothetical of the livestock killing dog, or, you know, that the dog that's at death row. It's either this or this dog is going to die. What are your thoughts and feelings about it?
Yeah, that for me, that always comes back to putting critical thought on the actual case. So when we're on social media and we hear about, you know, this is the dog's last chance, and you know, you have to use this tool, or, you know, positive reinforcement trainers are killing dogs, all of these really black and white statements that have no nuances in the discussion. There's no critical thought, and no one in the discussion typically, except for the person working on the case, really knows all the details. And so you might hear, let's use the livestock guardian case dog, where let's say it's a dog that is harming the livestock it is, you know, tasked to protect, and a positive reinforcement solution. But okay, so we're going to manage it. We're going to teach some alternative behaviors. Maybe we can teach some auto check-ins. We can get very creative, and then we can put it out in cyberspace and get tons of really amazing suggestions. Send the case to Ken Ramirez, and we'll get
Yeah.
amazing positive reinforcement alternatives to any kind of punishment, right? But let's say we dive a little deeper into that case and we discover, okay, the dog is a utility for this farmer. They don't care about the dog's, you know, well-being. They don't look at quality of life. They don't look at emotions. They're like, okay, this is a Maremma guarding alpacas or something like that, and that's the tool. And if this dog keeps harming my well-being and living, because I'm trying to raise this flock and make my living and survive, then the dog's going to have to go, and I'm going to take it out back and shoot it, or, you know, whatever potential outcome. Then where does the conversation go from there? And let's say that farmer's like, you have 1 week to fix this. If not, I'm going to shoot the dog. It's my dog. I can do what I want with it. I'm going to shoot it in the back. Then where do we go? Now, that's an extreme case, of course. That's not like most commonly what's going to happen. But it presents that question. Okay, do we need to use an aversive here to remedy this issue immediately? And what is the next steps? Can we start with an aversive and then move to a positive reinforcement program? Or is the aversive going to work itself? Is the aversive going to have an impact on the quality of life of that animal? Is that aversive going to save that animal? And so there's so many other questions that need to be asked in the discussion. And is the aversive going to work for that animal? Is the person using the aversive skilled in using that aversive? You know, so many questions come into it. So you know, when I get that question, I'm like, you know, I need details. I need more details to answer that question. And because 99.99% of the time, you're going to be able to come up with this positive reinforcement strategy to change the behavior, but it doesn't dig into the nuances of the case.
And the thing that I always I don't, as I said to you before, I generally don't get into debates and stuff, because, you know, I respect other people's opinion, may differ to mine, we can agree to disagree, and it's not why I want to necessarily put my energy. But my slant in it has always been, is my feeling is that in that extreme instance, let's just say the hypothetical dog that has killed livestock and you know, is posing a risk to livestock or society, etc. And the justification is, this is this dog's last chance saloon. Is you are trusting, you're putting your trust and you're putting your confidence in a gadget or device. And that's a bit like saying my iPhone is never going to stop. It's always going to work. It's never going to have a glitch. It's never going to have a problem. And for me, I wouldn't want to bank on the one instance where that thing, okay, taking the emotion out of it, take the morality, all that. Let's take those, because those things can often be triggering. Let's take it from a purely a technical point of view and make it really callous. And that, are you willing to bank that tool, that device is going to work 100% of the time? Because I'm not that it might be distance, it might be proximity, it might be, you know, the signal, the battery might be going, I don't know, it might malfunction, whatever, in that moment when you are absolutely needing that thing to work. And therefore, there is always that gamble that you go, if you're going to place your confidence and your trust in that item, you have to trust that it's going to be infallible, and that isn't possible. Now, that isn't to say that positive reinforcement is necessarily the answer. I would argue that actually management's going to be the way forward. Ideally, don't put the dog in the situation where it can rehearse that behavior, have access to that. Consider maybe, change of lifestyle, not taking it to that location, etc. Consider having it on a long line or a muzzle or hiring a freedom field. There's so many things, and it's not even about training, because even, it doesn't matter whether it's positive reinforcement training, balance training, aversive training. There is a level, there is a margin of what is this? Are you absolutely guaranteed that when you press the button, use your clicker, whatever, it's going to be infallible? And I would say probably not. So it wouldn't matter who was trying to help that dog. My practical, realistic response would be, let's not even discuss the option training. Let's put really good management practices and keep everybody safe. And obviously layer training on top of that as a realistic answer. But that's the thing that always baffles me. Are you that confident that tool is going to be infallible? And I'd be honest enough to say that, sometimes my timing's out. Sometimes I don't reward at the right place. Sometimes my reinforcement ends up in the wrong location. You're human, so yeah, it's an interesting, because it's always the one that gets thrown in there as the argument for and against, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also brings up the question of, are we using that tool then for management rather than actual behavior change? Because if for true behavior change, then we actually wouldn't need that tool anymore. So for instance, we wouldn't need the clicker to continually reinforce. We wouldn't need the e-collar to correct the dog. The environment should be dictating the behavior change, because behavior is in the environment. So if we're truly doing what we're supposed to be doing as behavior change experts, we shouldn't need that tool after the behavior's been trained. The environment and the natural occurring reinforcers for that animal should allow for that behavior to happen. If we're skilled trainers at that, there's obviously other examples where, yeah, we're going to use the tool and whatever it is, reinforcement for a particular thing, especially in a classical conditioning strategy, we need to, pair that association. But for true operant behavior change, we can often let the environment do the work. So that's kind of my answer to when there's a reliance, when people argue, oh, we got to rely on any tool, whether it's a positive reinforcement or aversive based tool. If we're still relying it, then it's actually just a management tool at that point, until you see the behavior change happen without the tool being part of the mix. And it's something to think about. Something I had Ken Ramirez on my podcast the other day, and was considering just how much can be done using really sound reinforcement strategies as well as the environment. I mean, he's got so many. He's so humble too, but he's so he has so many stories of just teaching animals to migrate, elephants to migrate. And no training tools. We're not putting e-collars on that. We're not putting hay in front of our streets or in front of the elephant. It's just using the environment to do that.
The fascinating thing when you hear people like Ken or Bob Bailey speak, it's their range of species they've worked with and their body of work, and in practical real situations and really intense situations where there is a life or death entity, and they've used for enforcement. And that even if you say, going back to the dog that's that's a danger and etc., even if you were to condition the dog and use the presence of sheep as a cue to indicate a discomfort or pain and make it aversive, I've known instances where people have done that, and yet with enough time surpassing, the dog has reverted back to showing interest and certainly a level of arousal when the livestock was there. And so it's one of those things that you go, how like in any training, I think you're constantly there is a level whenever with any training, you're hoping that what I've done is going to work. There is a level of hope. You hope that your behavior modification plan for the aggressive dog is going to stand up to time and the pressures that we impose on them. There is a level of hope. And it's our belief system that says, well, I'm going to hang my hope on reinforcement versus an alternative approach. So just on that note of getting into about discussions about different training. So a while back, you know, had the brave what would I say, just the brave decision to have a conversation, a dialogue with Ivan Balabanov, who does a podcast where he has conversations with people that might have opposing opinions of him. And there was a lot of conversation, obviously, within the podcast, but actually, probably the bigger conversation was post the podcast. So do you just want to talk through that experience, how that came to be, and obviously what happened afterwards?
Sure. So that was about this time last year, I think, actually, about February of 2023. And Ivan had sent me a couple of emails, like just reaching out, hey, you want to come on the podcast? And I didn't think anything of it really much because, you know, not to like uh, toot my own horn or anything, but I get dozens and dozens of podcast requests every year. So I typically say yes to everybody, whether it's, and I don't I know who Ivan was, but I wasn't like deeply involved because he's in a different world, sport dog world, a different, you know, training philosophy. So I was just like, okay, no problem. I'll be like, yeah. And I'm always open to talking to anybody, you know, is if I can reach an audience or reach people that might be not knowing what I do or the particular approaches I use for working with aggression, using positive reinforcement aggression, it's a win for me because I get to reach more people with that particular message. So he had reached out to me, and he was very forthcoming with that. He had reached out to quite a few well-known positive reinforcement based trainers, but everybody kept saying no to him, and it was kind of bewildering to me. I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Wonder what, like, is there something going on with him, or what else?" So I was like, and he just says that nobody wants to talk to me. So I said, "Okay, I'll do it, no problem." And I didn't think anything of it because I've done things for other we'll label them balanced organizations or podcasts. I've been on other balance training podcasts. I've spoken at the IACP conference, which is would people consider a balance training organization, and without a whisper, nobody ever said anything. There was no uproar. There's no
Mhm.
feedback, like nothing. Like nobody even said anything to me or commented about it, at least to my aware knowledge. So I didn't think anything of it. I was just like, yeah, sure. And so I get on the podcast and we start. Um, you know, Ivan does have longer podcasts. So they're like, I think it was about a 3 hour plus conversation, which actually would have been more if their video equipment wasn't running out of battery. That's how long the conversation was going on for. And then, of course, topics were a bunch of different things. But one of the questions, you know, was about using aversives and my take, and kind of like the conversation we just had. It was actually very similar. We're just talking about cases where an aversive might be warranted or not. And unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to completely expand on my thoughts on that. And so the podcast was recorded, you know, shared it, and suddenly there's this just incredible, I would call it uh, criticism about the particular topic, in that I wasn't argumentative or maybe forceful enough in my, um, you
Opinion.
know, opinion of force-free methods, and then, you know, using positive reinforcement. And I think that just the way that the show was structured, I really didn't get a chance to. And in hindsight, I probably would have prepared more and had more responses ready to go because Ivan's got a very different conversational style than me. I tend to sit back and just answer and don't interrupt, and but Ivan's a little different in that regard. So I didn't get a chance to say as much as I could have. But so I think that also had a bearing on what happened in the aftermath. um, but the issue, I think, for one of the issues was that we had talked about the word extremist. So extremist is, you know, somebody that takes their viewpoints to an extreme measure or dialogue. And that, I think, got extrapolated to me referring to force-free trainers as extremists. But unfortunately, that was taken out of context and not how I actually felt about it. I felt that trainers from either side or any particular camp, the ones that are extremist in that regard, are the ones really attacking everybody else for not following their particular methodology or their viewpoint. That's who I was referring to. But unfortunately, that extremist label has been used on force-free trainers prior to that, and I didn't recognize that. So people thought I was immediately taking sides with the balanced crowd and attacking force-free trainers as extremists. So the ensuing months were much dialogue on social media in regards to, the podcast, what I didn't say, what I did say, why didn't you talk about this? Why didn't you do that? And it was just massive amount of dialogue that was happening. And we can get more into that, but that was kind of the recap of what what precipitated all of the social media uproar.
So okay, so look, the conversation that I want to have with people really about lifting ownership is to obviously about training, obviously
Mhm.
about what people do in their daily work, and obviously about reinforcement based training and the effectiveness. But I want to sort of what was the impact on you as an individual when that all happened? Because watching from the sidelines, it was a melee of, it was like you were sort of put up as the great white knight that had to defend the honor of all of the community and their dogs, and
Mhm.
you failed, and therefore you were the victim of the wrath, I should say,
Mhm.
or certainly that's what it looked like. Was that how it felt like to you?
It was surprising. It was number one, I didn't realize just how much an influence people perceive me to have. And I guess that maybe I do have influence. I don't know. I mean, yes, I have a decent following on social media and I have a decent sized platform, but nowhere near some of these. There's other big trainers out there with a much larger following than me on social media, and they're much more, they have much more influence in through their platforms. But so I was actually surprised that I had gotten that particular message, or that particular narrative was occurring. I think that number one, I was like, okay, maybe I do have to take a little bit more responsibility, being in this leadership position, given this opportunity to have this platform. So the realization came out of that. But it was also difficult to deal with at the time because um, I had actually never gotten that kind of really significant amount of pushback on anything.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe a few years prior, I'd met, a couple Facebook posts, but nothing that didn't die down in a day, just a couple, nothing even close to what this turned into. So it was interesting for me and surprising for me to actually experience that at first. But it was also very difficult. It became a very stressful time because I was getting hundreds, if at last count, when I was trying to keep track of everything, over 1,000 messages via messenger, via Instagram, via email. I tried to reply to as many as I could, but I
Wow.
just physically obviously couldn't. And people were taking offense to that, like, you're ignoring me, you're silencing my voice. And that was tough because as much as I tried to respond to every comment, people thought I was just ignoring them or just brushing them off. But so that was one of the most difficult parts for me. And I was, literally spending 12 hours a day on my computer trying to just get to everybody over the course of several weeks. And it really took a toll on me too. It was starting to get burnt out and just saying, you know, what else to do here? What else can I do? And so I tried to add a couple extra Facebook posts, or I posted a few more additional posts, trying to clarify what I was talking about, clarifying my message, because I was trying to also explain why I did those things. Why would you go on a podcast and with a balanced trainer? Why would you give them a platform? Which was interesting because I went on his podcast. He wasn't on mine. I wasn't giving a platform to anybody. I was just happened to be on his podcast. So that was difficult because I just didn't know what steps to take next, because I tried to explain myself away, explain what I did, why I tried to reach out to anybody that wants to learn about positive reinforcement training. And I think the issue is, um, there's some that will consider just even talking to, or giving any kind of platform or socializing, or being friends with a balanced trainer is saying you agree with it. And they were using lots of labels like, you agree with abuse, you agree with abuse of dogs, and you're supporting that, and you're advocating for that, and you use aversives. And the difficult thing, as you know, with social media, is that people start to take things. And so it had gotten really tough when the hateful comments started to come in, actual threats. So it started to snowball into death threats to myself and
Wow.
my family. It started to slander. I had to pursue a legal situation, and where there was actual slander made against my business. There was, and the additional difficult thing was that because I'm a, you know, uh, Asian descent, so I'm a minority, and there's people that relate to that. And what I was difficult was that that was also brought into this conversation of advocating for, why don't you use your platform to advocate also for, marginalized groups?
Yeah.
And, why aren't you talking about this as well? And they were equating the podcast for some reason with me not doing those things. It was just like I started getting attacked for other things. Why aren't you supporting this group? Mike supports racists. I mean, like, it was just these wild
Wow. Wow.
accusations that started coming. And that's the difficult part of social media, because you have to decide when to respond and when to actually defend yourself and when not. Because with the vicious rumors, like, I'd come across a post and be like, "Oh yeah, I heard Mike, he abuses dogs, or he's a racist, or he supports racism, or he supports misogyny," and it's hard not to agree with those things. Nobody wants to say, "Oh yeah, I support racism,"
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But suddenly, if you don't agree with that person, now you support racism. And
Yeah.
so you can see it was like all of these different angles really started to come at me. But I have to tell you, Kamal, it was the best year of my life because it taught me so much, not only about myself, but how to navigate these conversations in these situations. And so I've learned from that experience, and it's fueled my desire to really just continue to grow our community and to help our industry move forward through all of these awful things that can happen to trainers. And it can, and I forgot to mention that it's happened to so many people we know. You and I would probably could have a conversation just how many other trainers that we know, or our names, that it's happened very similarly to them. And sadly, it's often the same group of individuals that are attacking these people, and they kind of move from person
Yeah.
to person, trying to push their narrative forward, using that person as the conduit for their message. And I didn't realize that. I wish I had known that before, but now I know that. And it's made me realize that the most important thing you can do in life is actually not react,
Yeah. Yeah.
So just like we're teaching our
That was
dogs
going to
to
be
be non-reactive,
my
right?
question was going to be, what did you learn from that experience? What did
Yeah.
you take from it? And
Yeah.
it's interesting that you say that, because I'm a great believer, even in your darkest moments, there's a lesson to be learned and gleaned from it. And it's not to say I want to do that again, or I'm glad I did it, but can you
Hmm.
take something from that experience? And I think that's a message that anybody in a situation where there's a testing of who you are. And I think it's, for me,
Yeah.
like, I haven't had it to that extent, but I've had in various things, and certainly in different walks of life that I've had a level of vitriol,
Hmm.
partly because of who and what I look like, partly of what I do, etc. And you just have to really learn. It really sort of grounds you to know and channel into, who am I? Who am I
Yeah.
in this moment? Because all these things, for me, they're almost coming up to test who you are, and to
Mhm.
allow you to center and ground yourself into, well, I know that I'm not racist. I know that I'm not misogynist. I'm not a misogynistic person. I know that I'm X. I know who I am. And if you aren't going to like me, it's absolutely fine. I'm probably not the person that's going to change your view, because you're, no matter what I say. And I'm very, where your focus goes, your energy flows. And I think sometimes it's very easy to get into when you feel like you want to defend yourself, you want to say your point, you want
Yeah.
to push back. And sometimes you go, do you know what? I'm gonna let you do whatever you want to do, because, and the other thing is to say, often it very much isn't about you per se. It's often
Yeah.
projection of something that else is going on. I mean, as I said to you, I think I reached out to you at one point and said you handled the whole thing with such grace and class. And I said to you at the time, in our conversation, I think it was on the Click Expo, you really, for me, the thing that came out of that, as observing it, was, I didn't really know you at all, but it made me have a lot of respect for you, because I went, wow, he's put himself above the parapet. He's got stoned, thrown at, spears at, and yet he's walked out of it with his head held high. And actually, I think you, in my opinion, you came off as I would say, you handled it, but I don't know anybody. I don't think anybody that handled it so with such class and grace. So I have to say, publicly, like how you should be, for whatever that is, whether you're proud of yourself or whatever, it really doesn't matter. It's more the fact that you definitely illustrated to others how to deal with something of such extreme, with dignity and class. So even that you should be at least, proud of yourself, really. On was there anything? I'm sure you've had opportunity, Peter. Is there anything from that conversation that you want to say, do you know what, here's my position on, or do you feel like, do you know what, that ship has sailed? Or is there anything that you'd want to say, actually, what I meant was, and here's your opportunity, as it were?
Yeah, well, no, first of all, I appreciate all of your kind comments. That means a lot because it's, again, I think we learn from our experiences like that. And my goal has always been to just, help others learn from seeing those experiences as well. From your own experiences, you can teach others. And that's my goal for moving forward, is to help, new and up and coming trainers that might be experiencing, and they probably will experience the same exact thing happen to them at some point. And so, yeah, so to answer your question in regards to the conversation, definitely would have taken a stronger stance and explained what the issues with using aversives are in aggression cases, especially because that's my specialty. That's what I feel I can talk about knowledgeably with experience and the data to back it up. So I would have focused on that more heavily, and clarified, what these nuances that we have to look at when we're talking about any kind of training tools or any kind of training situations or behavior cases, what we need to be looking at much more critically versus you can't do this, you can't do that, this is going to do that to the animal, this is going to do that. That doesn't solve the problem we're having now, which is just it's these strict lines drawn in the sand, this or that, yes or no, black and white. And that's sad because we have so much opportunity to have these discussions. So going back, I would have definitely clarified, where I don't use aversives, in aggression cases. There's, as you learn through time and experience, you find less and less need to even think about those things. And that takes time. And I wish I could have added that. I don't expect anybody listening to me on his podcast to be like, oh, yeah, Mike said this. Now I'm going to be suddenly force free overnight from using aversives. But it plants that seed towards this shift. And every trainer that might be using aversives that wants to seek other solutions using positive reinforcement, it's not going to be an overnight shift. It's going to be a slow change. But if you're always in the mindset of what can I do a little bit differently? How can I solve this with a positive reinforcement based solution when I'm very comfortable using these tools and I know I can solve it with this tool? That's hard because we're comfortable. We get stuck with what we're comfortable with. So I definitely would have stressed that more if I could have, because it's just it helps to navigate that conversation of I need to switch immediately or else I'm going to be, have stones thrown at me by this particular crowd. I need to have that opportunity for a safe space to learn, to be able to make this shift. And that can only happen through these more nuanced conversations without all the vitriol and the conflict and that type of difficult communication that can happen on social media. So, and everywhere else. So,
I think
yeah.
I have to say though, Mike, is you know, I think that conversation was powerful for maybe not the intention that you had, but it wasn't really about, it was, for me, it was again how you handled the situation. The conversation that you had, you were very much yourself. You didn't alter, you weren't combative, you were open, and obviously I think that um Ivan's interviewing style is more sort of like you said, he's trying to push his point, that's his interviewing technique. But you came across, in my opinion, you held yourself in good stead. And I don't know if I'm truthful. I'm not sure you would have had the opportunity to really, um, you know, um, to have that opportunity to articulate that. I think there was a level of gotcha in behind the intention. There was
Yeah.
that was, I would say, looking on. I have no dog in the fight. I don't know Ivan at
Yeah.
all. So and whilst I have a lot of respect for what he's done in his world, and all power to him, etc. It's not, I'm not, labels, etc. doesn't concern me. But I think it was a really powerful conversation for, I actually think the conversation and the post conversation was actually more impactful. I had more merit than the actual, you articulating about your work specifically. I think it was a bigger conversation. So, and sometimes I don't think in the moment you can't always see that, and I'm sure there'll be somebody watching on, that would have impacted, not necessarily for necessarily the work that you do, but I think that's certainly the way that you held yourself. So I think that the conversation was made more powerful. So going back to and obviously I appreciate you discussing that. Obviously that was one of the things I wanted to, and that can be because it sounded like it was a tough time. And that in itself, can be challenging for people to bring up again. So thank you for talking about that. So let's take the conversation back to training and your work. What is, in your experience, of what you do, what is the main cause of aggression then? Why are dogs aggressive?
Yeah. So I kind of going back to what we were talking about before is at the emotional level and what's happening underneath the hood, so to speak. It's over the years, I've really shifted my focus towards that, where, when you first start out, maybe some of the trainers listening in now have started out with an ABA background, learning about operant learning and the ABCs and maybe taking Susan Friedman's LLA course, which is brilliant, by the way. It's it doesn't allow you, though, to understand the deep emotional levels and what's happening with the dog. And that is what we need to focus on. We need to look at the causes rather than the symptoms. So the symptoms are the barking, the lunging, the biting behaviors. The causes, once we address those, you don't get the symptoms. And so, and typically it's fear being the number one typical, reason for dogs to be aggressive towards something. They just want the scary thing to go away. They want the threats or the provocative stimulus to just get distance or be eliminated. Let's just get the scary thing away. But there's a lot of other underlying reasons that aren't as talked about as much. Fear and pain rather, is one of the most common ones. Pain and underlying medical issues also are highly underdiagnosed.
Absolutely, yeah.
Um, and then you have cases where frustration and arousal, again, top terms that need to be defined clearly, but that can fuel aggressive responses. You could have rage or anger if you're looking from an effective neuroscience standpoint, as part of an emotion level, and emotional responses are the aggression. And so I think there's a lot of underlying reasons that we need to be sure we're assessing correctly if we're going to be addressing the problem. So like in your world too, some dogs that are biting, they might be doing it for fun. They're not fearful of the decoy. They're not angry. They're having a good time. And so that aggressive response could actually just be completely motivated by something different. Now, if I try to counter condition a dog that's done bite work,
Yeah.
it's not going to make any difference. The dog's will be like, may I have another cookie? And I'll bite. So it's, I think, again, assessing the cause for me, the underlying reason.
So, I mean, yeah, absolutely echo what you said. And the other thing that I suppose I'd say is, because a lot of my work is obviously sports stuff, but a lot of the work I do now is really with dogs with aggression, or for want of a better term, reactive behavior. And you're absolutely right. And I would say I would almost just be bold as to say, in all the years that I've been working with dogs with behavioral problems, and it's talking 25, probably about 25. I didn't start immediately. I think I started when probably about 25 years, if not pushing close to 30. I can hand on heart say I think I've met 3 dogs that I thought, oh no, this dog is there's something else. There's either a neurological problem, there's a major problem with this dog, and it is unsafe. But I would say the vast majority of dogs, there was an underlying issue, and most were pain. A lot of them was lack of education. The dogs just didn't understand that how to deal with frustration. They hadn't been taught any impulse control. They hadn't taught any, they hadn't had any behaviors on stimulus control. They didn't have any alternatives. They didn't know anything basically.
Yeah.
And things like resource guarding was resource guarding in the vast cases that was, to be truthful, was trained. It was conditioned by, by little tiny triggers that had been, the puppy picks up the socks and the owners chase after it, and then that escalates and grows and grows, and next thing you know, the dog's, guarding everything and anything. And I would say that to jump in, wade in without taking it back and doing what I call the Sherlock Holmes part of our role and unpicking, you're absolutely right. You're just dealing with the superficial. You're dealing with the end bit. You're dealing with the fact that dog's gone raw and bitten something, and you go, actually, it's there's 20 things before that we could prevent, change, alter, improve to avoid the end result, the end outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think always thinking about why is the dog doing it, as we do with all behaviors. But like to that resource guarding dog, the dog that guards any kind of resource, we have to, it's really important for the clients too to understand why. Why is this? And for the resource guy, I mean, it's a natural behavior for any animal, right? And to keep things of value. And so once we start explaining that, I think to clients and the motivations behind it, then it's so much easier to address, because they also, I think it's important to note that some clients, if you start gutting into, like, we're going to counter condition your dog to guarding their, their toy or something. So we're going to toss treats every time your dog's got a toy. If they don't understand the why, they'll be like, wait a second, I'm just tossing treats at my dog. Isn't that like reinforcing their
Reporting
bad
it.
behavior? Or isn't that like rewarding that? Like, so they have misconceptions. So again, you have to go back to helping clients understand, why is this dog guarding? Well, it's just an evolutionary, survival thing that all animals have learned to keep things of value to help them survive. And it's evolved to other things like toys, of course. But yeah, I think underlying reason is the crucial part of aggression cases.
Yeah. Here's I suppose a provocative or devil's advocate question.
Mhm.
What's your thinking that there's um, a, a belief system that all aggression is fear-based?
Hmm.
And do you think there's certain dogs that find aggressive behavior reinforcing?
I'll break that into two questions. So, to answer the question about fear, that's actually a common misconception. I've seen that, that statement being made, all aggression is fear-based. Now, most aggression is fear-based, but not all aggression for certain. And it's when you start looking into the details of it, it becomes blaringly obvious that it's not all fear-based, because you can just look at the dog's, body language and physiological responses. The same physiological responses have been well studied in many mammals, and like pupil dilation versus a dog that's not showing those physiological signs like elevated heart rate, and all of these things that we can measure and that we can assign a particular emotion or particular context to, that's when we can say, okay, this is probably not fear, because the body language is much different, or the physiological responses are much different here. Then if you look at the neuroscience and what's happening in the brain, and the MRI scans that have shown this, and all the other tests that have been used to measure what's happening with inside a dog, it all just points to, okay, it's not always just fear. It can be some other things. And like we were just mentioning, some dogs are having a good old time, protecting their handler. So, and that dog's not fearful. So, yeah, we have to be careful about assigning that, because the classical approach to teaching, to working with dogs that have fear, is classical counter conditioning, desensitization, gradual exposure, making sure we're taking care of that dog holistically. That's the common practice, and it works for a vast majority of dogs. That, though, is not going to work again for your owner guarding,
Yeah.
Malinois. It's
Yeah.
it's not going to touch it at all. So,
Yeah.
and then I'm sorry, the second part of the question was
About do you, which I suppose you've actually inevitably answered it. Do you find that some dogs actually enjoy
yeah.
aggressive behavior?
Yeah, I think, well, here's the interesting thing is that you still get some of that dopamine hit regardless of the type of aggression you're seeing. And technically, they're all reinforced, in terms of the contingency. So whether it's a negative reinforcement contingency where the dog's learning, okay, if I have this aversive stimulus approach and then bark and lunge, it'll go away. So the behavior, the negative, you're taking away something to reinforce the behavior. So it's technically, reinforced, but some dogs, and I think reading in between the lines of your question, did they find it like an enjoyable activity? Yes. So if you take dogs, for instance, that we've selected for particular aggressive behaviors, like sadly pit bull fighting rings in some locations of the world, we could argue that some of these dogs, they're doing it for sport. They're having a good time. And the body language, their behavior, the physiological responses all indicate that. So yes, those dogs, in sense of if we're gonna muddy that reinforcement label a little bit, yes, I do think they're engaging it for the fun of it, for lack of a better term.
So on that, I suppose in layman's terms, the way I sort of articulate to clients is, you have some dogs that when they act regressively and they make the scary thing move away, and to anthropomorphize it, the dog would feel a sense of relief and oh, the scary thing has moved. I can breathe. Okay, there's one version. Other dogs, they do that barky thing, and they make the thing move away or get a reaction, and they actually go puff up and they go, oh, I'm the man, and I'm strutting around and I'm feeling good because I've achieved my goal of intimidating or scaring. And those two things, there's you could say that initially, depending on like Mallies and Guardy German Shepherds, when they're in adolescence, they can start off as a level of apprehension, but then they sort of go, oh, actually, I quite like how that made me feel. There's a different end response. So you could say, again, this is purely anthropomorphizing, so people can understand.
Yeah.
Some instances, dogs would find it, thank God that scary thing has moved away, and they're almost apprehensive about the possibility of having to do that or be put in that situation again. Other dogs almost go, hey, that worked. I now feel empowered and feel good about that experience, and almost, not, I wouldn't say seek it, but certainly go, oh, there's another opportunity to rehearse that pattern or that series of behaviors again. And I think that's the sort of difference. And if you use counter conditioning and desensitizing with a dog that actually finds it reinforcing in itself and finds it exhilarating and gets that high from it, it's probably going to be not as impactful, and as you're not going to get the same results, I would say.
Definitely. For those dogs that are you seeing that phenomenon where it seems like for lack of a better term, almost proud of them, the
Yeah.
confidence about it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to not. I was just trying to avoid being too,
Yeah.
yeah. But you get the gist of the. I suppose it's just
Yeah.
to articulate it in a more sort of basic
Yeah.
term. Yeah.
I mean, we can operationalize it through measuring body language and
Yeah.
getting into
Yeah.
the nitty gritty of that. But, just put a label on it. Like a dog, we could say is like, yeah, I did that. And
Yeah.
don't let the door hit you in the butt on the way
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And a
Yeah.
dog, for those dogs, I'm much more operant, meaning I'm teaching alternative responses, differential reinforcement kind of strategies. We're teaching a dog what to do instead before they actually get to that level of, I need to express my behavior using aggression and really, intensely. And just, I'm going to continue going on with that. Like, so those dogs, I find they might have that significant reinforcement history there and find value in the sense of that where they're able to do that. So it can be hard to counter condition that away or say, okay, we're going to use treats to help you feel better about these things. Yes, that's part of the program, but I think teaching them some alternative response that still serves that function, and okay, go do this instead, and that's still going to pay off really well for you, if not more exciting and exhilarating and fun to go do this activity after you've seen that particular provocative stimulus. So there are nuances that you might have to consider where a dog like that. It's kind of like it's interesting. So you see that sometimes with dogs that just have practiced it quite a few times. So a good example would be a dog in a shelter environment. They're in their kennel and they bark and lunge only as the handler's leaving.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, yeah, now I got your number, and I'm gonna get you. Here's my foot hitting you in the butt on the way out, and
Yeah.
that's kind of what again, putting a real anthropomorphic way of looking at it. But
Yeah.
it's you see that phenomenon,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so we have to take slightly different strategies with that and teach the dog, what do you want? What can we get you to do instead that's still going to pay off really well as I leave this kennel space? Versus a dog that's quick snap snap and then run into the corner kind of, or bark and then run into the corner kind of things. Two different kinds of cases.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, again, I think that often I think and it comes back to your original point that you made, which is getting your hands on dogs and having them like living with them, working with them on a daily
Yeah.
basis, that you can take the technical information and apply it and understand that, oh, okay, this in this dog, actually you can have a dog that is both fearful and also slightly learns to enjoy the experience, can have both things almost happening simultaneously, or a dog that appears to be overtly aggressive and let's just say proud, but actually underneath the dog is fearful, apprehensive, etc. And the only way that you develop that skill of being able to assess and determine which technique is to get your hands on lots and lots of dogs, which is, I think that's something that I think sometimes people can lack that, Mike. They just lack hands-on experience. I mean, like you said, how many dogs that you had at foster, that in itself, that amount of data that you're collecting.
Absolutely. I think it's so crucial, especially if you're going to work with aggression cases, is to get the hands-on experience. And really no better ways to do that, either volunteering in a shelter, or working in a shelter environment, or fostering dogs, really, because you're going to get such a wide variety of dogs. And that's sort of where the art of training, we hear that, the science and art of training, and people are like, no, it's all science, or some people are like, no, it's all art. But I think it's both. I think
Both.
it's it's
Absolutely.
the nuances. Yes, we could operationalize things in terms of like what to do with your body language and really detail like all those things in minutia. But there's it's like a dance many times. Like we're gonna go for a dance and you've got your partner and you're gonna be doing a particular dance, but it's all flowing and based on the music you hear and the environment, people around you, how you're feeling, how well you know your partner, well you know how they move, how good you are at dancing. And I think it's very similar to with dogs, is that we're constantly navigating that conversation based on our own skills and expertise and experiences, but also with the individual dog in front of us. And that's the beauty of it. It's just so unique every time. And in that uniqueness, you continue to learn how to adapt yourself based on the next dog you have in front of you. And you only do that again with you gotta get in there, right?
I think
Especially with aggression.
absolutely. I mean, the thing about obviously with working aggressive dogs is it's having great mentors out there that can support you, because there is a level of risk and it can be contentious. It's not
Yeah.
like teaching the puppy to do a puppy recall. If you make a misread or don't reward the right thing, it can be confusing, but there's not the same level of jeopardy that if you've got a dog with a bite history, it is due to be euthanized, and you've got to make an assessment, etc., etc. That's a very different ball game. So I think for me, it's definitely reaching out to rescues, getting your hands on dogs. One of the best experiences actually mentors of mine suggested when I was about 18 was working in a kennels with rescue dogs. And the kennel actually had, at the time, they had dogs that were boarding dogs, standard boarding dogs. I did residential training. Also, they had dogs seized from the cruelty cases, from puppy farm cases. And we also had dogs seized under our Dangerous Dog Act legislation. So they'd been seized, they'd been kennelled, they'd been assessed, they were due essentially to be destroyed. But we had to care for them, we had to work with them, we had to manage them. Some of them you could not get in
Mhm.
a kennel with. Others were the sweetest dogs on good earth, but had obviously been at risk to other entities. And it was such a fantastic experience for just getting your hands on a whole load of dogs, and I strongly encourage people to do that. And again, finding mentors that can guide you and support you and be there to hold your hand and to facilitate your learning.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And most shelters, the larger humane societies and shelters, I know in the US and also in the UK, they have behavior teams in a lot of them. You can actually learn quite a bit in terms of behavior change strategies as well as hands-on. So as you mentioned, highly recommend seeking out those folks to learn more, quick side note too, their philosophy in training might differ slightly from yours or be a lot different, but you can always learn something.
Yeah.
As long as you learn to filter at an early stage what's relevant to you, what matches your philosophy and your ethics. And that's important because if you put up a wall of like, okay, this person uses that tool once in a while, or they used it back in 1984, now I don't want to talk to them ever again. That really stunts your growth and stunts learning opportunities. Now, I understand people have their boundaries and their ethical lines that they don't want to cross. And I completely understand that. But I do think, for newer trainers listening in, try to establish those early on, just kind of figure out where you want to be at. Try to be flexible with that because I've shadowed folks that use much different tools. And even as I moved through my career and became crossed over to other things, I still, learn from other people that might use different tools or have different philosophies because they have other techniques or other approaches to certain problems or things or safety, especially that I can learn a lot from. So, in regards to mentors, they may not always match everything you want, but take what you want to learn and filter it and add that to your repertoire.
Absolutely. And I think for me, it's being open to dialogue and it's open to conversation. And I think the blessing that I suppose you and I had was that we came from a viewpoint where we genuinely believed that what we were doing at that time was correct based on our knowledge and our information that we have access to.
Yeah.
And the advantage of today is that information is more readily available, it's more fluid, etc., etc. But for me, I suppose that's why I can have dialogues and with people that have opposing or different viewpoints from me, because I was of that mindset at one point, and I wasn't like, I don't want to make it about, oh, I had an epiphany moment, which for me, I definitely did have a couple of things that happened that made me go, okay, I need to think about this. But more from for me, it was when I first crossed over, if you want to call it, I was cynical about the power of reinforcement-based training. I was the first to say, no, I don't need that clicker training stuff, a load of rubbish, da da da. I can get it this way. Oh, what a load of rubbish! You don't need to tell your dog it's all. I did all the stock phrases that everybody else did, and it took me time to go, okay, I need to just think about it. I need to just digest it. So my viewpoint is always to be open to the dialogue, because you might just start that tiny ripple with somebody else. Whereas if you put up that this is my belief system, you are the opposition, we are in conflict, none of us are going to grow. None of us are going to move forward. No, and the bottom line is the consequences of our stuff, human being stuff. Again, it's going to be the dogs that are going to be suffering. If we really genuinely love dogs and we want to move the trajectory forward and how we raise them, how we live our life with them, how we view them, we all need to be on the same song sheet, or certainly we need to have the same agenda at behind us, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could play a little devil's advocate too, is that you have um, somebody has really strong ethical boundaries for themselves, meaning that they will not, you hear the comment like they're never going to associate with a child abuser, right? And then they equate the same thing, a dog abuser, somebody that uses particular tools in their mind is the equivalent. Like, why would we talk to, open a door, have a podcast conversation with a child abuser? It's something that it's awful part of our society when somebody abuses a child. Why would we do the same thing with dogs? And you have to, as outrageous as that might seem to some of us, it is not outrageous to the people that have those belief systems, and we have to empathize with that because that's might be the space where they're in. And much like you were just saying, Kamal, I actually also did the same thing. I went from I'm using all these verses to I'm going to cross over to now I'm this really I'm just focusing on force-free training, and you can solve anything through positive reinforcement. I've seen the magic of it, and so you start to actually talk down to people at that stage, and you can see all these different mindsets that come into the overall conversation. And one thing that is important to recognize is where in the journey is the particular person you're talking to? Where is that person's growth? Where is their mindset at that moment in their journey? If you had asked me 10 years ago when I had fully switched to really force-free training philosophy and mindset, I would have talked down to some people, and I shudder at some of the things I've maybe said a few times, but I recognize that that's not helping the learner. It does nothing to open up a window of opportunity for learning with the person you're talking to. It's just talking down to them or just reinforcing ourselves. And going back to what I was saying before is, of course it's reinforcing to us because everybody else who's in a similar mindset, like, yeah, Mike, and like and comment and you know heart emojis and all that stuff, and it just becomes more reinforcing for you to say those things. Oh yeah, this person, that dog abuser, this person using that tool. And what is that person that's using that tool going to think, and how are they going to feel comfortable messaging me like, yeah, I'd love to learn more about what you're doing when I've just blasted them on social media or something. And so I've learned to become very respectful of where people are in their journey, whether it's they've moved to a very, those establishing those really strong ethical boundaries. I get it. I understand where they're coming from. And I also can empathize with it. Maybe their past experiences, especially with other humans in their lives, they might have been let down or experienced abuse. And so that's how they look at that through their lens. And so when people are like, oh, these people are awful, they're just really creating division. Part of me also empathizes with that because I want to understand where they're coming from. And the way to do that, again, is just keeping the lines of communication open, regardless of where somebody's viewpoint is. Now,
Well,
don't get me wrong. I don't just let people stomp all over me and continue with like derogatory stuff. There's a line to draw on that as well. But start with empathy first, and that'll get you a long way to teaching others.
So I'll share this little insight, and this is my own personal experience, and it's quite a personal one. It's not, and it's stuff that I talked in other forums about. But I was a victim of abuse when I was a child, and my previous job was obviously I was in law enforcement, which again is well publicized. But one of the specific roles that I did, and I actively, if I look back now, I chose to do that job. I knew what it entailed, was talking to people that had done heinous things to abusers. And I often at the time, because it took me a long while to sort of actually sort of make peace with being able to discuss that, what had happened, etc. And I questioned, and why was I sort of drawn to that vocation? And my thought at the time was because I wanted to I would was to almost persecute them, and make sure that they were how would I phrase it? Would be that they would have the full weight of the law or the repercussions of their actions. And it wasn't that at all. This is my own personal experience. Actually, it was about understanding and healing. So what I was getting from it was I was trying to work out, why would you do that? Why would you do those heinous things? And it wasn't about them, it was about my own healing, as it were. So I think that that's an interesting way in which you phrase it, and that's a really extreme example, but I think you're absolutely right. Certainly with the vitriol that you had on Facebook, it's to parallel people that use alternative methods trained with abuse and abusers, and even the word extremist, it instantly has connotations to terrorism and the most extreme end of violence and murder and etc etc. And the power of language and the ramifications of certain words and terms, we need to, again, for me, like as you said, it's interesting you said the word empathy. That experience in my work, my previous life, was really about me having my own healing process. And it was the takeaway for me from that whole experience was those people didn't stand a chance because of what had happened to them beforehand. And I'm not condoning what they did in any way, shape, or form, or what was done for me. But what it did was it allowed me to let go of certain things. And I think that's the thing that is about. You've got to, like I said to you before, projection. We all put our stuff on, we're all trying to do the best we can, which is really what the premise of lifting all ships was to have meaningful conversations, which hopefully just affected one person, created one ripple where it connected with them, it resonated, whether it was a dog training issue or whether it's something deeper, which is why I really reached out to you. And it's interesting that you brought that up and you phrased it the way you did, because it definitely, that was something that definitely happened to me as an individual in my previous vocation. And I think happens now in our world, in that we should not, it doesn't mean you have to forgive. It doesn't mean you have to say that, condone what they do. It doesn't mean to say that even you have to, but a level of one, empathy, of understanding of, maybe they just don't have an alternative way. Maybe they genuinely believe that's the correct thing to do with that particular dog. Maybe they feel that they haven't had support. They haven't had, that all the other trainers that have tried to solve the problem have failed, and the dog is now, and they're so connected with the dog because the dog's their life and they have no choice. But now they feel that the only option is that, who knows? And often when we make these bold statements about methodology, we don't look at the nuances of, I can recall, I'm sure you can, numerous cases I've had where the people have resorted to using certain tools because they feel like they have no other option. They love the dog. They know that they know that they failed the dog, or they feel they failed the dog. They feel that they've done everything that they know to do, and this is it. Because if they don't do this, the consequences are going to be so earth-shattering and damaging. This is their only option. And sometimes, if we operate come from a place of, well, you're a bad human being because you did that, my attitude is, okay, that happened. Let's see if we can move forward from that, and let's see if we can give you alternatives, because I have all these other things that could be options for you.
Yeah, yeah, and you mentioned really the crux of this conversation is that the one word is the understanding, and when you think about it, it's what we've talked about with the dogs and the aggression issues, is understanding them, and the same thing with the people that we're having conflicts on with, whether it's social media or in person. It's just understanding where they come from, the why, and once you start to do that, it just, with the people that you might have conflicts with, if you go from a place of trying to understand why and where they're coming from, that is, again, for me, one of the best things that happened to me last year was that it really, really had me think more about that and approach conversations that way. And it just brings an inner peace and an inner, for your soul. It just helps you feel like, okay, there's a reason for this. These people aren't doing this purposely. Nobody's going on saying, I'm going to attack Mike Shikashio today on social media. It's because of what they're experiencing themselves, what they're going through in their lives, and their particular
Yeah.
situation, their current, mindset. It's all has to do with that, as
And
if you,
I think the
yeah,
other thing looking on was, I think that a lot of people that attacked you is because they saw you as, they may not have had the voice to be able to say the things that they felt you
yeah,
should. So it wasn't necessarily about Michael Shikashio as an individual. It was, there was my opportunity to communicate what I feel, and you were the representative, and you failed us per se. That was
yeah,
I think
yes,
was the thing. And
yeah,
I think that's too much responsibility to put on an individual. Michael Shikashio does not, he doesn't speak. It's a bit like,
yeah,
I don't speak for all people of color. I'm only speaking for people like my
yeah,
perspective, my
yeah,
experience. I don't speak for all reinforcement dog trainers. I just
yeah,
speak from my experience. And even, I don't speak, like I said, I was careful
yeah,
how I phrase that. I don't speak for people that have been subject to abuse. I speak from my experience and what I would learn from it. And I'm not saying that everybody has to have my perspective. It's just possible. Just, I suppose my takeaway, I suppose, from this conversation is, um, just be willing to be open to the possibility, and allow. And if the outcome is, you know what, I don't think these people are my vibe, I'm going to go left and they can go right. If that's what you gain, that's a brilliant lesson to learn,
mhm,
isn't it? It's a brilliant lesson to go, actually, I don't think these are my people. And even it refines you to know who you are, because all in
mhm,
doing that, what you're actually doing is refining your perspective and going, oh, I absolutely got my little villagers, I've got my lane, I
yes,
know exactly
yes,
who I am. So
yeah,
everything that's almost testing that is saying, don't waste your energy getting into Facebook discussions and vilifying Mike Shikashio. If you choose to take that path, that's fantastic. Find your people, because that's what we're all looking for, isn't it, at the end of the day?
yeah, yeah. It also has me thinking about, if you try to please everybody that you have, requests and comments to do this or that, and you try to please everybody, you'll never be able to. And that changes, that can change who you are as your own person
That
because you're
phrase, isn't
trying to
it, Mike?
satisfy everybody.
Was it stand for something and fall at anything? I think you're absolutely right. You can't please everybody, and I think that's something that you have to learn. You can't be
Yeah.
all things to all people. Mike Shikashio is not the spokesperson for all reinforcement. Neither is Kamal Fernandez. Neither is so and so. We're all trying to muddle through, and I hope that what we have we both have a level of privilege. We have a platform to show what is possible, and if we
Yeah.
can keep showing what is possible and demonstrating, hopefully by example, maybe it might get people thinking. And if they think, you know what, Mike and Kamal, bloody load of rubbish, don't, okay,
Yeah.
that's great too. You know who you are. That's brilliant. Mm.
Yeah, and there's a responsibility. I learned that much more so this year or last year. There's a responsibility having a platform. I recognize that, and I've had the fortunate opportunity also to have a platform supported by many of these people that might be having criticisms of me, previously supported or maybe purchased things for me, and so I recognize that as well. I don't want to put a message out there like, oh, don't bother me with your
Yeah,
concerns and
absolutely.
don't do anything special. But yeah, I have a responsibility, absolutely, as if I'm, sort of a leader in the industry, for lack of a better term. Yes, I should be considerate about what I'm saying and how I'm saying things and who I talk to. And at the same time, though, we're not voted into this position. It's different than like when I was the president of the IAABC, I would speak on behalf of the organization. That's
Yeah.
different. You have to be you're speaking for the membership, that pay their dues and they're part of the membership versus what I do now. I wasn't voted anything that I'm aware of, but I still though don't, take for granted that I do have this fortunate position of influence and leadership right now. So there's lots of thinking to do when you're having these
It's
conversations.
both a privilege and an honor for people to look up to you,
Mhm.
and to hold you in high esteem. I think it's just a reminder to us all to go, but yet Mike's still human, and
Mhm.
so he's going to occasionally drop the ball, and that's
Mhm.
we all
Yep.
do that. None of us are infallible. I know I've done things that in hindsight I go, but if I can learn from it and glean and
Mhm.
share that experience with others, that's what I think that I think, like you say, we all have those of us that have a platform, no matter how big or small, we have a responsibility to act and hold ourselves in, or to demonstrate who we are. And I think being consistent with who you are, but also those people looking on, be fair to go, Mike's a human, he's doing the best he can. And he's gleaned from the experience, and I think that's the thing that for me really does articulate. Just be, and again, empathy should be applied to all. Mike, it's been fantastic talking to you. I'm just mindful of the time. I suppose we could chat for another hour or so. I'm just mindful of your time, and I know that you have other commitments. Is there anything that you just wanted to add or close or say on any of your work or this conversation?
I think, well, first of all, thank you. I think this was a really amazing conversation, and I think if for my wishes or for my last thoughts here is just to, for everybody listening, and just keep doing what you're doing and show what you want to show out there, and don't worry about what everybody else is doing, because the change happens when you just get out there and do it, and people can see that, and then be open to teaching others that want to learn. That's how they learn, because they see what you're doing. They see, okay, this new trainer is like, oh, I love what Kamal's got there, and Kamal's not blasting anybody, or especially that person. Just keep those learning opportunities open, because that's how we're going to continue to grow the community. And we do that by example. We do it by keeping those lines of communication and showing kindness and empathy in the way we do that. That's how we continue moving this community forward.
Absolutely. And I think, for me, I think the thing is, it's okay to, I would have a viewpoint of people, but articulate that respectfully. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be personal. You can say, I disagree with that person's technique or the use of that particular item, or
Mhm.
that's fine. But try not to make it, by making it personal attack on the person. We change the conversation, and we take it to a place that isn't necessary. And I think that's the thing that I think that I've got from this message is, remember that the person's only human. Mike, it's been fantastic. Thank you very much for your time. I hope people have enjoyed listening to this episode. I know I've enjoyed having this conversation. If they want to reach out to you, Mike, how can they? What's your website?
Best way to find me is aggressivedog.com. Everything's on there: the conference, the podcast, the articles, the videos, the courses. So it's the one portal to all of the stuff.
Excellent. And I've deliberately not we've not gone into because Mike does so much work, and I wanted to get him to tell you guys his website, because he provides so much information out there. Go and check it out. Now, I wanted to have a different conversation with Mike rather than about the nuances of how he trains. If you want to find out how he trains and what he does, check out his podcast, check out his work, and if you can attend a conference or see anything he does online or in person, grab it with both hands. Thank you all very much for listening, everybody. Hopefully this has been interesting. Whatever you're doing, be safe and be kind to others. I hope hope you enjoyed this episode of Lifting All Ships. If so, make sure you hit like and subscribe. Remember, a rising tide lifts all ships.